My name is Samantha Williams, 34 years old, and nobody at our family dinner knew I was a federal banking fraud investigator. Not even when my sister Brett casually announced I used your identity for an $85,000 loan with a smirk. My mother laughed, adding, "What can you do about it? You can't even afford a lawyer." They both chuckled while I quietly texted my team under the table, "Initiate fraud investigation." What happened next would change our family forever. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had a family member who thought they could take advantage of you without consequences. Growing up in our modest suburban Chicago home, Brett and I shared a bedroom, but little else. 3 years younger than me, Brett was always the golden child. Our parents had different standards for us from the beginning. When I forgot to do a chore, I lost privileges for a week. When Brett neglected responsibilities, Mom would say, "She's just being a kid," and Dad would nod in agreement. The pattern became clearer as we entered our teen years. I excelled academically, joining debate team and spending weekends studying while Brett focused on popularity and social status. My achievements were expected. Hers were celebrated extravagantly. My straight A report card earned a nod, while Brett's B- in math prompted a celebratory dinner at our favorite restaurant. Everything changed when I turned 15 and Brett was 12. Dad walked out after a particularly heated argument with Mom. I later learned he'd been having an affair with his administrative assistant for over a year. The divorce was messy, bitter, and forever altered our family dynamic. Mom, devastated by the betrayal, turned to Brett for emotional support while blaming me for being too much like your father. I inherited his analytical mind and reserved nature, which suddenly became character flaws in Mom's eyes. Brett, who had Mom's outgoing personality and charm, became her emotional crutch and confidant. "You never supported me when your father left," Mom would tell me during arguments. Brett was the only one who really cared. The truth was, I processed grief differently, focusing on maintaining my grades while working part-time at the local library to save for college. Mom interpreted my coping mechanism as coldness. Brett, meanwhile, developed expensive tastes. Mom indulged her every whim despite our tighter financial circumstances after the divorce. New clothes, the latest electronics, weekend trips with friends. "Brett deserves nice things after everything she's been through," Mom would say while I wore secondhand clothes and saved every penny. By the time I graduated high school, I had secured a partial scholarship to Northwestern University and worked 2 jobs to cover the remaining expenses. Mom attended my graduation but left early because Brett, then 15, had a minor dance recital the same evening. "You understand, right? Brett needs the support more than you do. You've always been independent," Mom said. I nodded and watched them leave halfway through the ceremony. During college, I visited home less frequently. Each visit featured the same pattern: Mom, showcasing Brett's latest accomplishments while questioning my life choices. "Banking law, how boring." "Brett is thinking about fashion design," was Mom's response when I shared my career interests. I discovered my passion for financial investigation during an internship at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation my junior year. The meticulous nature of tracking financial discrepancies suited my detail-oriented mind. I found purpose in protecting people from fraud, perhaps because I understood what it felt like to be undervalued and manipulated. After graduation, I accepted an entry-level position at a regulatory agency that later led to my role as a federal banking investigator. I specialized in identity theft and loan fraud cases, building a reputation for thorough and successful investigations. Meanwhile, Brett dropped out of 3 different colleges, each time with a different excuse. Mom financed each fresh start without question. "She just hasn't found her passion yet," Mom would explain during our increasingly infrequent phone calls. I never shared detailed information about my career with Mom or Brett. They knew I worked in banking, but nothing about my investigative role or security clearance. Partly because they never asked, and partly because I learned that keeping professional boundaries with my family protected my peace. Over the past 5 years, Brett had called me 6 times asking for loans. The first time, she needed $2,000 for a security deposit on an apartment. The second, $3,000 for a car repair. Each subsequent request increased in amount and decreased in plausibility. I paid the first 2 times before realizing Brett had no intention of repaying me. The last time she called requesting $7,000 for a business opportunity, I finally refused. "You've become so selfish," Brett accused. "Family is supposed to help family." "I've helped you twice already," I I reminded her. You promised to repay those loans and never did. I can't believe how stingy you've become, she responded before hanging up. That was 8 months ago. We hadn't spoken since until Mom's birthday brought me back to Chicago for what would become the most consequential family dinner of our lives. I arrived at Mom's house at exactly 6 o'clock on a Friday evening in October, a bottle of her favorite wine in hand and a sense of dread in my stomach. 8 months of silence between Brett and me had created an uncomfortable gap I wasn't sure how to bridge. Still, it was Mom's 60th birthday, and I was determined to make an effort. The house looked exactly the same as it had during my last visit. The same faded curtains, the same family photos on the walls, though I noticed my graduation picture had been replaced with a glamour shot of Brett at some rooftop party. "Samantha, you made it, Mom," said when she opened the door, her tone suggesting she'd expected me to cancel. She accepted my kiss on the cheek with stiff formality. "Brett is already here. She took the whole day off to help me prepare." The implied comparison wasn't subtle. I'd flown in this morning and come straight from a meeting with the Chicago branch of our agency. Taking a whole day off during an active investigation wasn't an option, but explaining that would only lead to more questions I preferred not to answer. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, handing her the wine. "Your favorite Cabernet." "Oh, Brett already brought 3 bottles of that new champagne everyone's talking about. You know how she always knows what's trending. But this is nice too," she added, setting my bottle aside without much interest. I followed her into the dining room where Brett was arranging flowers in an elaborate centerpiece. My sister had always been pretty in a conventional way, but now she looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Designer dress, professionally highlighted, hair, manicured nails that must have cost at least $100. "Sam, oh my God, you actually came," Brett exclaimed, rushing over to hug me with excessive enthusiasm. "Love the outfit. Very professional. Very you." Her tone made professional sound like a character flaw rather than a compliment. I was wearing a simple black pantsuit, my usual work attire. Nothing flashy, but well-tailored and appropriate. Brett's dress probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Happy birthday dinner, Mom," Brett continued, turning back to our mother. "I told Sam 6, but I was worried she might be late. She's always so busy with her mysterious banking job." The dinner began awkwardly and quickly deteriorated. Mom and Brett exchanged inside jokes and references to people I didn't know. They discussed recent shopping trips and spa days they'd shared while I sat quietly eating the overcooked roast beef and listening to their chatter. "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you both," Brett said, clapping her hands excitedly as Mom served dessert. "I closed on that condo in Lincoln Park last week, the one with the lake view I showed you, Mom." I nearly choked on my cake. Lincoln Park was one of Chicago's most expensive neighborhoods. Even with my comfortable federal salary, a condo there would be a stretch. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom beamed. "I knew you'd get it. The universe always provides for those who put good energy out there." "How can you afford that?" I asked, unable to contain my surprise. Last I knew, Brett was working as a social media coordinator for a small marketing firm, a job that certainly wouldn't support a Lincoln Park lifestyle. Brett and Mom exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. "Actually, that's something I've been meaning to tell you," Brett said, her voice suddenly casual in a way that immediately put me on alert. "I've been doing really well lately. The condo, the new car, my trip to Bali next month." "That's quite a lifestyle upgrade," I remarked cautiously. Brett took a sip of her champagne, then looked me directly in the eyes. "I used your identity for a loan. $85,000 to be exact." The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "You did what?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Don't look so shocked," Samantha, Mom, interjected with a dismissive wave. "It's not like you were using your perfect credit for anything important." Brett nodded. "Exactly. You're so boring with money. Always saving, never enjoying life. Your credit score was just sitting there going to waste." I struggled to maintain my composure, years of investigative training kicking in. Stay calm, gather information, document everything. "How exactly did you get my personal information?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Brett shrugged. "It was easy. Remember when I helped Mom clean out the attic last year? I found your old files. Social security card, birth certificate, even your old tax returns. You really should be more careful with your documents, Samantha." "I left those here because I thought they would be safe with family," I replied, the betrayal cutting deep. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Mom said. Brett deserves this opportunity. She has vision ambition. The loan is just a stepping stone to her success. And what about paying it back? I pressed. That debt is in my name. Brett waved her hand dismissively. I'll pay it eventually. Once my lifestyle brand takes off on Instagram, my follower count is growing every day. Which bank? I asked, trying to sound casual. First National Trust, Brett answered proudly. Though I also have applications pending at Midwestern Savings and Liberty Financial. My stomach dropped. 3 different banks. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a systematic fraud. What can you do about it anyway? Mom added with a smirk. It's not like you can afford a lawyer on your government salary. Brett told me what banking compliance officers make. If only they knew. Banking compliance officer was the cover I used with family to avoid explaining my actual role in financial fraud investigation. Besides, Brett continued, I already spent most of it. The condo, down payment, the Bahamas vacation last month, my Chanel collection. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through photos of her purchases, completely oblivious to the gravity of the situation. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A message from work about an ongoing case. I pulled it out, pretending to check the notification while actually opening a new message to James, my second in command. Need comprehensive fraud investigation. Identity theft. First National Trust, Midwestern Savings, Liberty Financial. Suspect Brett Williams. Victim me. Send update to secure channel. Urgent. I pressed send and looked up to see Mom and Brett laughing about something completely unconcerned about the bomb they'd just dropped on my life. What can you do about it? Brett repeated, misinterpreting my silence for defeat. Nothing, that's what. By the time you figure anything out, I'll probably have used your identity for another loan. Little did she know the wheels of justice were already in motion. I excused myself from the table 20 minutes later, citing an urgent work situation that required my attention. Neither Mom nor Brett seemed particularly disappointed to see me go. Work emergencies on a Friday night, Brett teased. Your life is so sad, Samantha. You should learn to relax a little. Some of us take our responsibilities seriously, I replied, gathering my purse. Mom, happy birthday again. I'll call you tomorrow. Don't bother if you're just going to lecture us, Mom responded already, refilling her champagne glass. Brett and I have plans anyway. I drove straight to the Chicago field office of our agency, my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. Professional detachment was essential in my line of work, but this case hit too close to home. Literally. The security guard recognized me immediately. Agent Williams didn't expect to see you tonight. Everything okay? Just need to handle something urgent, Frank, I replied, swiping my badge at the entry point. James was already waiting in the conference room when I arrived, along with Laura from our digital forensics team. They both looked up from their laptops as I entered. Samantha, James began, his expression concerned. We pulled the initial reports based on your text. Are you sure you want to pursue this? It's your sister. That's exactly why I need to handle this by the book, I responded, setting my bag down and taking a seat. What have you found so far? Laura turned her laptop toward me. Brett Williams, age 31. Currently employed at Flashpoint Marketing as a social media coordinator. Salary approximately $50,000 per year. However, her spending patterns over the last 18 months indicate an income of at least $200,000 annually. She clicked to the next screen. The loan from First National Trust was approved 3 months ago. $85,000 secured using your social security number, birth certificate, and forged signature on several documents. And the other banks she mentioned, I asked. Already approved, James said grimly. Midwestern Savings issued a line of credit for $25,000 4 months ago. Liberty Financial approved a personal loan of $35,000 just last month, all using your identity. $145,000 total, nearly double what Brett had admitted to. The betrayal stung, but the methodical pattern of fraud disturbed me even more. There's more, Laura continued, her voice softening slightly. We found evidence of credit card applications in your name. 3 premium cards with combined credit limits of $70,000. All maxed out. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to process the information. My sister hadn't just committed identity theft. She had orchestrated a comprehensive financial fraud scheme with me as the primary victim. $215,000 in total liability, I summarized. All in my name. Yes, James confirmed. And based on the timing of applications and spending patterns, this wasn't a one-time desperate measure. This was calculated, planned, and executed over an 18-month period. The psychological impact alone makes this a serious case, Laura added. Using a family member's identity adds a layer of breach of trust that the courts take very seriously. The professional part of my brain was already categorizing the crimes: identity theft, loan fraud, credit card fraud, forgery, each charge carrying significant penalties. The personal part of my brain was still struggling to reconcile the sister I grew up with and the criminal who had systematically stolen my identity. Samantha, James said gently, "You know you can't be the lead investigator on this case. The conflict of interest would compromise the entire investigation." I know, I nodded. "I'm too close. You should take point, James. I'll provide victim statements and evidence, but otherwise remain at arm's length." "There's another issue," Laura interjected. "Preliminary data suggests Brett Williams may have used other identities besides yours." My head snapped up. "What? Whose?" "We're still gathering information, but there are financial anomalies linked to your mother's accounts as well, plus 2 other individuals we haven't identified yet." The revelation sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about me. Brett had potentially victimized others, expanding the scope of her crimes significantly. "Standard protocol would involve notifying local police immediately," James pointed out. "But given your position and the sensitivity of the case, we should coordinate with the Bureau directly." "Agreed," I said, forcing myself to think like an investigator rather than a betrayed sister. "Let's establish a timeline. Laura, I need complete financial forensics. James, coordinate with the FBI liaison. I'll prepare my victim statement and recuse myself officially from the investigation." For the next 4 hours, we worked methodically building the case file that would eventually lead to Brett's arrest. Laura discovered evidence that Brett had accessed online banking portals using my credentials, redirected mail containing financial statements, and even attempted to open investment accounts in my name. The sophistication of these activities suggests she might have had help, Laura noted, around midnight, or at least guidance. Some of these tactics are commonly used by organized fraud rings. Could she have outside accomplices, James wondered? "I don't think so," I replied after consideration. Brett has always been observant and adaptable. She probably researched identity theft tactics online and improved her methods over time as she gained confidence. By 2 a.m, we had compiled enough evidence to justify formal charges. James had arranged for FBI agents to be briefed first thing in the morning with potential arrest warrants to be executed within 48 hours. As I prepared to leave, exhaustion finally catching up with me, Laura caught my arm gently. "Samantha, are you okay? This can't be easy." I paused, considering the question seriously. "No, I'm not okay. But I will be. Financial crimes aren't victimless. Just because the victim is me doesn't change our responsibility to pursue justice." Still, James added, "It's your sister. No one would think less of you if you needed some time." "Time won't change the facts," I replied, gathering my notes. "Brett made her choices. Now she'll face the consequences just like any other suspect we investigate." As I drove back to my hotel, my phone rang repeatedly. First Brett, then Mom, then Brett again. I let the calls go to voicemail. Whatever they wanted to say, it wouldn't change the evidence or the course of action now set in motion. The first voicemail was Brett, her voice slurred from champagne. "Sammy, you seemed upset at dinner. Don't be such a stick in the mud. It's just money and your credit will recover eventually. Call me back. Love you." The second was Mom, Samantha. "Your abrupt departure was incredibly rude. Brett went to all that trouble to be honest with you, and you couldn't even appreciate her honesty. Call me when you're ready to apologize." I deleted both messages and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation that would forever change our family dynamic, and I needed what little rest I could get before facing it. By the time I turned my phone back on at 7 the next morning, I had 12 missed calls and 23 text messages. Brett and Mom had apparently realized something was wrong when I didn't return their calls. Their messages evolved from annoyed to concerned to increasingly panicked. The most recent text from Brett sent a chill down my spine. Samantha, please tell me you're not doing something stupid about the loans. It was just a joke. Call me as soon as possible. A joke. She had committed multiple felonies that could result in years of prison time, and she was calling it a joke. I showered and dressed carefully, selecting my most authoritative suit. Today wouldn't be about sisterly confrontation. It would be about justice. Still, I couldn't deny the knot of anxiety in my stomach. Despite everything, Brett was still my sister. My phone rang again as I was leaving the hotel. Mom this time. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Samantha Marie Williams, she began without preamble, her voice shrill with anger. What have you done? Brett is hysterical. She says her bank accounts are frozen and she got some kind of notice about an investigation. Good morning to you too, Mom, I replied evenly. Don't you take that tone with me. Brett told me everything. She made a little mistake with some paperwork and now you're trying to ruin her life. How could you be so vindictive? I took a deep breath, counting silently to 5 before responding. A little mistake with paperwork doesn't result in $215,000 of fraudulent debt in someone else's name. 200 and... Mom's voice faltered briefly, before regaining its accusatory edge. That's beside the point. She's your sister. Family protects family. Does that protection extend to me? Or am I not considered family when Brett victimizes me? You're being dramatic. Brett would have paid you back eventually. With what money, Mom, her salary can't support her current lifestyle, much less repay hundreds of thousands in fraudulent loans. She has prospects. Her social media career is taking off. She just needed a little boost to get started. What she did wasn't a boost, Mom. It was identity theft and loan fraud. Both are federal crimes. Crimes? Mom's voice rose an octave. You're talking about pressing charges against your own sister. Have you lost your mind? I'm not pressing charges, I clarified. The banks and federal agencies will be doing that. This is now officially outside my control. What are you saying? The first note of fear crept into her voice. I'm saying Brett committed multiple serious financial crimes. The evidence has been documented and provided to the appropriate authorities. What happens next follows standard procedure for cases of this nature. Samantha, Mom's voice dropped to a near whisper. What have you done? What I'm legally and ethically obligated to do, Mom. Brett needs to face the consequences of her actions. She's your sister, Mom was shouting now. You're supposed to protect her, not throw her to the wolves. She should have thought about that before she stole my identity. I ended the call as I reached my rental car. 30 minutes later, I pulled up outside Mom's house. I hadn't planned to confront Brett personally before the official investigation proceeded, but James had called with disturbing news. Brett had attempted to withdraw large sums from all her accounts and had booked a one-way flight to Mexico departing that evening. I needed to assess the situation firsthand before things escalated further. As I approached the front door, it flew open to reveal Brett, her face blotchy from crying designer outfit replaced with jeans and a sweatshirt. How could you? She demanded, blocking the doorway. I trusted you. You trusted me. I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. You stole my identity and racked up over $200,000 in fraudulent debt. That's the opposite of trust, Brett. It wasn't fraud, she insisted, lowering her voice as a neighbor walked past. I was going to pay it all back. I just needed startup capital for my business. Your business? You mean your Instagram posts about luxury products you can't actually afford? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. You don't understand my vision. I was creating a brand. Built on stolen money and lies. Mom appeared behind Brett, her expression a mixture of anger and fear. Get inside, both of you. The neighbors don't need to hear our business. Once inside, Brett collapsed onto the sofa, her composure crumbling. They froze all my accounts, Samantha. Everything. I can't even buy groceries. Was that really necessary? Standard procedure in fraud investigations, I replied, remaining standing. Assets are frozen to prevent further financial crimes or flight attempts. Flight attempts, Mom repeated. What are you talking about? I turned to Brett. Want to tell her about your one-way ticket to Mexico, the one you purchased at 3 this morning with the last credit card that hadn't been flagged yet. Mom's face paled as she looked at Brett. Is that true? Brett avoided her gaze. I just needed a vacation to clear my head. A permanent vacation beyond extradition, I corrected. That's not the action of someone who made a simple mistake. Okay, I panicked, Brett shouted, jumping to her feet. What was I supposed to do? You obviously went nuclear on me. Some government banking person called me this morning, asking all these questions about accounts and loans. They mentioned federal charges, Samantha. Federal. What did you expect? You committed federal crimes. I expected my sister to protect me. Brett's voice broke. Not whatever this is. I protect people from financial predators like you every day, I said quietly. That's literally my job. Your job? Mom looked confused. You're a banking compliance officer. What does that have to do with investigations? I realized I'd said too much. Or perhaps finally enough. I'm not a compliance officer, I admitted. That's just what I tell family to simplify things. I'm a federal banking fraud investigator specializing in identity theft and loan fraud cases. The silence that followed was deafening. Brett sank back onto the sofa, the color draining from her face. You're lying, she whispered finally. You're just saying that to scare me. Check my credentials if you don't believe me. I removed my badge from my purse and placed it on the coffee table. Federal Banking Fraud Investigation Unit. I've been with the agency for 8 years. Mom picked up the badge with trembling hands. This can't be real. It's very real, and so are the charges Brett is facing. Brett's bravado finally collapsed completely. Samantha, please. You can't let them arrest me. I'll lose everything. My condo, my career prospects, everything. Things you obtained through criminal activity, I pointed out. Things you never legitimately owned in the first place. I'll pay it all back, Brett promised, tears streaming down her face. I'll get a second job. I'll sell everything. Just call off the investigation. It doesn't work that way. I can't just call it off. The evidence has been submitted. Multiple agencies are involved now. But you started it, Brett accused. You could tell them it was a misunderstanding. And commit obstruction of justice. Perjury, risk my entire career, and possibly face charges myself. That's what you're asking me to do. Yes, Brett shouted, desperation clear in her voice. That's what family does for each other. Mom placed herself between us. There must be something you can do, Samantha, some strings you can pull. Brett made a mistake, but she doesn't deserve to have her life ruined. This wasn't a mistake, I corrected firmly. A mistake is accidental. Brett systematically stole my identity, opened multiple fraudulent accounts, and accumulated hundreds of thousands in debt over an 18-month period. That's deliberate, calculated criminal behavior. But she's your sister, Mom pleaded, her earlier anger now replaced with fear. Being my sister doesn't place her above the law. If anything, it makes her betrayal worse. The doorbell rang, startling all three of us. Mom went to answer it, returning moments later with a grave expression. There are people here to see Brett, she said quietly. They say they're from the FBI. Brett's eyes widened in panic. Samantha, please, don't let them take me. For a moment, looking at my sister's terrified face, I felt a pang of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? Then I remembered the methodical way she had stolen my identity, the cavalier attitude when confronting me about it, and the flight booking that proved she had no intention of taking responsibility. I'm sorry, Brett, I said, meaning it despite everything. But this is the consequence of your actions, not mine. 2 FBI agents entered the living room, their expressions professionally neutral. Agent Richardson, a tall woman with short gray hair, and Agent Patel, a younger man with thoughtful eyes, introduced themselves and asked Brett to come with them for questioning. Am I under arrest? Brett asked, her voice barely audible. Not at this moment, Agent Richardson clarified. But we do have several serious matters to discuss with you regarding financial activities conducted in your name and others. You have the right to have an attorney present during this conversation. Others, Mom repeated, looking confused. What others? Agent Patel glanced at me briefly before answering. Our investigation has uncovered evidence suggesting Miss Brett Williams may have used multiple identities beyond her sister's to secure loans and credit. That's ridiculous, Mom scoffed. Brett wouldn't do that. Using Samantha's information was just a one-time thing between sisters. Brett avoided everyone's gaze, staring fixedly at the floor. Brett, I prompted, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Is there something else you need to tell us? It wasn't a big deal, she finally mumbled. Just a few extra accounts to build my credit portfolio faster. Whose identities did you use? I pressed. Brett remained silent, but Agent Richardson answered for her. We've identified 4 additional victims besides yourself, Miss Williams, including your mother, Ellen Williams. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her chest. That's not possible. I would know if someone was using my information. Not necessarily, I explained gently. Brett lived here with you. She had access to your mail, your personal documents. If statements were sent electronically, she could have created email accounts in your name to intercept them. Is that true? Mom asked Brett, her voice breaking. Did you use my information too? Brett finally looked up, tears streaming down her face. I was going to fix everything once my brand took off. No one was supposed to get hurt. The other victims? I turned back to Agent Richardson. Who are they? Amanda Turner, Zoe Rodriguez, and Daniel Martin, she replied. Do those names sound familiar? They did. Amanda had been Brett's college roommate. Zoe was her best friend from high school. Daniel was an ex-boyfriend she'd remained close with. How much? I asked, dreading the answer. The total fraudulent debt across all 5 victims currently stands at approximately $420,000. Agent Patel responded. Mom sat down heavily, the color draining from her face. This can't be happening. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Brett admitted, her voice small but clear. I did it. All of it. The confession hung in the air, irrefutable and damning. Brett Williams, Agent Richardson, began formally based on your admission and the evidence we've gathered. We are placing you under arrest for multiple counts of identity theft, loan fraud, wire fraud, and credit card fraud. As she continued reading Brett her rights, Mom began to sob quietly, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. Brett stood silently as Agent Patel produced handcuffs. Is that really necessary? I asked quietly. She's not violent. Standard procedure, Agent Patel replied, though he seemed genuinely apologetic. I'll ensure they're not too tight. Brett looked at me one last time before they led her away. I never thought it would end like this. I just wanted what you had, Samantha. Security, respect, success. I worked for everything I have, I reminded her gently. There are no shortcuts. I know that now, she whispered. Too late. As the front door closed behind them, Mom turned to me, her expression hardening through her tears. Are you satisfied now? She demanded. Your sister is being taken away in handcuffs. Was that worth it to you? To see her humiliated like that? This isn't about satisfaction, Mom. Brett committed serious crimes against multiple people who trusted her. There are consequences for those actions. You could have handled this privately, helped her fix it quietly. No, I couldn't. Not legally or ethically. And enabling her would only have allowed her to continue victimizing others. So your precious job means more to you than your family. It wasn't a question, but an accusation. My integrity means I can't selectively apply justice based on personal relationships, I corrected. Brett didn't just hurt me. She hurt you. She hurt her friends, people who trusted her. Mom's anger seemed to deflate, suddenly replaced by a bone-deep weariness. What happens now? She'll be processed and formally charged. There will be an arraignment, probably within 48 hours. Given the amount of money involved, and the multiple victims' bail may be substantial if granted at all. And after that? If she pleads guilty, there might be a deal. If she goes to trial and is convicted, federal sentencing guidelines for these types of crimes typically result in 5 to 7 years imprisonment. Years, Mom repeated, horrified. My little girl could go to prison for years. The reality of Brett's situation was finally hitting home. This wasn't a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over or a mistake that could be fixed with an apology. This was the criminal justice system in motion with real and severe consequences. She's not a little girl, Mom. She's a 31-year-old woman who made calculated decisions to commit fraud. Repeatedly. How can you be so cold about this? Mom demanded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Don't you care at all that your sister's life is being destroyed? Brett destroyed her own life, I countered, though not unkindly. And yes, of course I care. But caring about someone doesn't mean shielding them from the consequences of their actions. Mom collapsed onto the sofa, looking suddenly much older than her 60 years. I don't understand how this happened. Where did I go wrong with her? The question hung in the air between us. I thought about all the years Mom had indulged Brett's every whim, excused her every mistake, and consistently prioritized her over me. The pattern had been established early. Brett could do no wrong, and I could do no right. I think I began carefully. Brett grew up believing she was entitled to whatever she wanted, however she could get it. Are you blaming me for this? Mom's voice rose defensively. I'm answering your question, I replied calmly. Brett never learned that actions have consequences because she was always protected from them. That's not fair. I raised you both the same way. The statement was so divorced from reality that I almost laughed. No, Mom, you didn't. Brett was your precious baby who could do no wrong. I was the responsible one who was expected to take care of myself. That's not true, Mom protested, but there was uncertainty in her eyes now. Isn't it? When was the last time you celebrated one of my accomplishments the way you celebrated Brett getting a B-? When was the last time you defended me the way you always defended her? Mom had no answer, and I didn't expect one. Years of family dynamics couldn't be unpacked in a single conversation, especially not on the heels of Brett's arrest. I should go, I said, gathering my purse. I need to finalize my victim impact statement and meet with the prosecutor. You're really going through with this, Mom said flatly. You're really going to testify against your own sister. I'm going to tell the truth, I corrected. Brett chose to commit these crimes. I didn't choose to be her victim. As I reached the door, Mom called after me, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Will you keep me updated? Let me know what happens next. I turned back, surprised by the request. Of course. Despite everything, she's still my sister. And you're still my mother. Something shifted in Mom's expression. Then a flicker of recognition, or perhaps regret. I haven't been much of a mother to you, have I, Samantha? The admission, however, small, was unexpected. You did your best with what you knew I offered, not quite ready to absolve her, but understanding the complexity of the moment. Will she be okay? Mom asked, genuine fear in her voice. In custody, I mean. She's not a violent offender. She'll be treated accordingly, I assured her. And I'll make sure she has proper legal representation regardless of how things stand between us. Mom nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a kindness she knew Brett didn't deserve from me. As I left, I realized this was the first honest conversation we'd had in decades. It had taken Brett's arrest to strip away the pretense and denial that had defined our family dynamic for so long. The truth, however painful, was finally out in the open. The weeks following Brett's arrest unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. My normally orderly existence became a chaotic stream of legal meetings, family confrontations, and professional complications. Brett's arraignment was scheduled for the Monday following her arrest. I attended against my better judgment, sitting in the back row of the courtroom as my sister, dressed in a standard-issue jumpsuit that hung loosely on her frame, pleaded not guilty to 17 separate counts of fraud and identity theft. Mom sat in the front row, having exhausted her savings to hire a private attorney for Brett. She didn't acknowledge me when I entered or left the courtroom, her focus entirely on Brett, who looked small and frightened behind the defendant's table. Bail was set at $200,000, an amount Mom couldn't possibly afford. Brett remained in custody, her designer clothes and luxury condo swapped for a cell in the federal detention center. The professional fallout came swiftly. While my supervisors commended my ethical handling of the case, particularly my immediate recusal from direct investigation, the unique circumstances created unavoidable complications. The defense will claim bias, Director Martinez warned during our meeting, 3 days after Brett's arraignment. They'll argue that your personal animosity toward your sister motivated the investigation, not the evidence. The evidence speaks for itself, I pointed out. The digital forensics are conclusive, and Brett confessed. Initial confessions made without counsel present can be challenged, he reminded me. Your sister has now retained Alan Dershowitz's cousin as her attorney, and he's already making noise about procedural improprieties. I wasn't surprised. Brett had always known how to present herself as a victim, even when she was clearly the perpetrator. What does this mean for the case? I asked. It means we proceed carefully. You'll need to provide your victim impact statement and evidence, but otherwise remain at arm's length. Some colleagues may question your judgment either for pursuing charges against family or for not catching the fraud earlier. I couldn't have caught it earlier, I objected. I had no reason to monitor my credit for fraud by my own sister. I know that Director Martinez assured me. But perception matters in our line of work. Trust is our currency. He wasn't wrong. In the following days, I noticed subtle shifts in my workplace interactions. Some colleagues were overtly supportive, stopping by my office with coffee or offers of assistance. Others became conspicuously professional, their previously warm demeanor replaced with formal courtesy. The wider family fallout was even more pronounced. My father, who had remained peripherally involved in our lives since the divorce, called me from his home in Phoenix. "I heard about Brett," he began awkwardly. "Your Aunt Judith called me." Aunt Judith, Mom's sister, had always been firmly in Brett's corner. I could imagine how she had framed the situation. "I'm sure Aunt Judith gave you a complete and unbiased account," I replied dryly. "She said you had Brett arrested for borrowing money. Brett committed systematic identity theft and fraud against me and 4 other victims totaling over $400,000, I corrected. Federal agencies had her arrested because that's what happens when you commit federal crimes." A lengthy silence followed. "I always worried about Brett's sense of entitlement," he finally admitted. "Your mother indulged her too much after the divorce." The acknowledgement, however, late was surprisingly validating. "Brett made her own choices, Dad. But yes, the pattern was established early." "Are you okay?" he asked the question, catching me off guard. My father had never been particularly attentive to my emotional well-being. "I'm managing," I answered honestly. "It's complicated." "If you need anything," he offered, letting the sentence hang unfinished. "Thank you," I replied, knowing neither of us quite believed he would follow through if I actually asked for help. The professional complications extended beyond my immediate workplace. As a victim and witness in a high-profile fraud case, I was temporarily reassigned from active investigations to training and administrative duties. "Just until the case concludes," my supervisor explained. "We can't risk any appearance of conflict of interest." The reassignment felt like punishment, though I understood the necessity. My expertise was in investigating financial fraud, not teaching others how to do it. The classroom felt confining after years of active fieldwork. 6 weeks after Brett's arrest, Mom finally called me. Her voice sounded hollow, aged beyond her years. "I visited Brett yesterday," she began without preamble. She told me everything, about taking out loans in my name, using my retirement accounts as collateral for lines of credit. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, meaning it despite our strained relationship. No one deserved to be victimized by someone they trusted implicitly. She said she was going to surprise me with a villa in Florida for my retirement. Mom continued, her voice cracking slightly. "That's why she needed the money from my accounts. To give me a dream. Retirement." The manipulation was so typically Brett that it made my heart ache. Even now, facing serious charges, she was spinning stories to minimize her actions. "Mom, Brett spent the money on herself," I said gently. "The financial records show exactly where every dollar went. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, that condo she couldn't afford." A long silence followed. "I know," Mom finally admitted. "Her lawyer showed me the evidence. I just wanted to believe her. I've always wanted to believe her." The admission cost her visibly. For decades, Mom had built her identity around being Brett's champion, her unwavering supporter. Acknowledging Brett's true nature meant confronting her own role in enabling it. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her question from the day of Brett's arrest, but with new understanding behind it. "Her lawyer is negotiating a plea deal," I explained. "If she accepts responsibility and agrees to cooperate in recovering as much money as possible, she might receive a reduced sentence." "How reduced?" "Maybe 3 years instead of 7. With good behavior, she could be out in 24 to 30 months. Mom absorbed this information silently. "I sold the house," she said after a moment, "to pay her legal fees and make restitution to the victims. I'm moving into a senior apartment next month. The family home sold to clean up Brett's mess. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same home where Brett had found and stolen my identity documents was now gone, another casualty of her actions. Where will Brett go when she's released? I wondered aloud. I don't know, Mom admitted. I won't have room for her. Maybe your father. We both knew that was unlikely. Dad had maintained minimal contact with Brett over the years, their relationship fractured by distance and disinterest on both sides. She'll have to build a new life, I said, from scratch, with a felony record. The reality of Brett's future hung between us, stark and unavoidable. Her actions hadn't just resulted in temporary inconvenience, they had permanently altered the trajectory of her life. I keep thinking about what you said, Mom continued hesitantly, about how I raised you both differently. I didn't want to believe it, but I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks. I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. You were always so capable, so independent. Brett needed more guidance, more support. At least that's what I told myself. But maybe I just made excuses for her because it was easier than expecting more. The insight, however belated, was accurate. For years, Mom had lowered her expectations for Brett while raising them for me, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that culminated in our current situation. I'm sorry, Samantha, she said quietly, for not being the mother you deserved, for not seeing your achievements the way I should have, for always taking Brett's side even when she was wrong. The apology, unexpected and genuine, brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Mom, I managed. That means a lot. Can we try again? She asked hesitantly. Not pretending the past didn't happen, but maybe moving forward better. I'd like that, I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As we ended the call, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The road ahead would be difficult for all of us, but for the first time in decades, it felt like we might be walking it with honesty rather than delusion. 18 months after that fateful dinner, I sat across from Brett in the visitation room of the Federal Correctional Institution where she was serving her sentence. The harsh fluorescent lighting emphasized the changes in her appearance. Gone was the designer clothing and carefully maintained highlights, replaced by a standard issue uniform and natural brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Brett had ultimately accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to 3 counts of identity theft and 2 counts of wire fraud in exchange for a 5-year sentence with eligibility for parole after 3 years. Additionally, she agreed to full restitution to all victims, a process that had required selling her condo and surrendering all assets purchased with fraudulently obtained funds. You look good, Brett offered as we settled into the uncomfortable plastic chairs. That promotion suits you. News of my recent advancement to Deputy Director of the Midwest Division had made its way to her through Mom, who now visited Brett monthly and called me weekly, a new rhythm in our healing relationship. Thanks, I replied. How are your classes going? Brett had enrolled in the prison's business administration program, her first genuine educational pursuit in years. Actually, really well. I got an A on my accounting ethics paper. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, and a small smile crossed her face. Yeah, I know. Talk about learning the hard way. This was our 3rd visit in the past year, each one progressively less strained than the last. The first had been almost unbearably awkward, filled with Brett's defensive justifications and my carefully maintained professional distance. The second had shown cracks in her facade, hints of genuine remorse beginning to emerge. Today felt different. There was a clarity in Brett's eyes that had been missing before, a groundedness that suggested she had finally stopped running from reality. I've been thinking a lot about why I did it, she said, folding her hands on the table between us. The identity theft, the fraud, all of it. I nodded, giving her space to continue. I always felt like I was living in your shadow, Brett admitted. You were the smart one, the responsible one, the successful one. I was just Brett. Mom's favorite, but never really good at anything. You had talents, I countered. You just never developed them. You were always looking for shortcuts. Because I was afraid of failing, she acknowledged. If I didn't really try, then I couldn't really fail right, except I failed anyway in the worst possible way. The self-awareness was new, and I suspected hard-won through hours of mandatory therapy and the stark reality of incarceration. I wanted what you had, Brett continued. The respect, the stability, the sense of purpose. But I wanted it instantly without the work. So I took shortcuts that turned into crimes. I told myself I deserved it, that I was just borrowing your good credit until I established my own. And the others, I asked quietly, Mom, your friends? Brett's eyes lowered in shame. Same justification, different victims. I convinced myself I was helping Mom by managing her finances that my friends would never notice because they weren't as detail-oriented as you. I had an excuse for everything. The honesty between us felt fragile but precious, a delicate bridge being rebuilt over a chasm of betrayal and hurt. I'm sorry, Samantha, Brett said, looking directly into my eyes. Really sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for hurting you, for betraying your trust, for thinking my desires were more important than your financial security and peace of mind. I had waited a long time to hear those words, to believe them when they finally came. Thank you for saying that. I've written apology letters to everyone, Brett continued. Mom, Amanda, Zoe, Daniel. My therapist suggested it as part of taking full responsibility. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed them to know I understand the harm I caused. Have you heard back from any of them? Mom, obviously. And surprisingly, Daniel. He won't be visiting or anything, but he acknowledged the apology. The others, not yet. Maybe never. I have to accept that as part of the consequence. Outside the prison walls, life had moved forward for all of us. Mom had settled into her senior apartment, making new friends, and even beginning to date again, something that had surprised us both. I had continued building my career recently, purchasing my first home, a small but charming bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. The financial damage Brett had caused was slowly being repaired. My credit had recovered after months of diligent work with the credit bureaus and banks. Mom's retirement savings were depleted but not entirely gone, and we had worked together to create a sustainable budget for her remaining years. What will you do when you get out? I asked the question that had lingered unspoken during our previous visits. Brett considered this carefully. Start small. Get a legitimate job, even if it's entry level. Find an apartment I can actually afford. Live honestly, even if that means living simply. And long term, I'd like to use this experience somehow. Maybe work with financial literacy programs, help people understand how to protect themselves from people like I was. Turn this whole mess into something useful. The plan was realistic and humble, a far cry from the grandiose schemes and shortcuts that had defined Brett's previous approach to life. I think that sounds like a good path, I offered. One day at a time. As our visitation time neared its end, Brett asked the question I sensed had been on her mind throughout our conversation. Will we ever be okay again, you and me? I considered the question seriously, not wanting to offer false hope or premature forgiveness. I think we're building something new, I finally answered. Not what we had before, because that wasn't really healthy anyway, but something more honest with better boundaries. Brett nodded, accepting this measured response. I'd like that. To earn your trust back eventually. To be the kind of sister you deserve. The guard announced the end of visitation, and we both stood. In an unexpected moment of vulnerability, Brett asked, Can I hug you? It's allowed with permission. I hesitated only briefly before stepping forward and embracing my sister. She felt smaller in my arms than I remembered, more fragile. As we separated, I saw tears in her eyes. I never thought I could lose everything and still find something valuable, she said quietly. But I'm learning more about myself in here than I ever did out there pretending to be someone I wasn't. As I drove away from the facility, I reflected on the long, painful journey that had brought us to this point. The betrayal had cut deeply, but from that wound had emerged unexpected healing across our family. Mom and I had developed a relationship based on truth rather than comparison and competition. I had learned to establish and maintain boundaries without guilt. And Brett finally was confronting the reality of her choices and their consequences. Sometimes I realize the most profound growth emerges from our deepest failures. Brett's crimes had shattered our family's carefully maintained illusions, forcing us all to rebuild on a foundation of truth rather than denial and favoritism. The experience had taught me that loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from consequences, but rather supporting them through those consequences toward genuine change. It had shown me that forgiveness isn't a single moment, but a process that unfolds gradually, alongside accountability and growth. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes standing firm in your values means standing alone, at least temporarily. The path of integrity isn't always the path of popularity or comfort, but it leads to a peace that cannot be found through shortcuts or compromises. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a sense of hard-won peace. The journey wasn't over, but the direction was clear. Healing, accountability, truth. One day at a time. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Remember, sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most important growth. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate your own challenging family situations with both compassion and courage.